it felt so dense and so dark and so weighted because I was experiencing the harm that I had caused other people. In March of 2019, I had this really spiritually transformative experience due to an overdose of drugs. What I experienced was a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. So I had this burst of energy going up and down my body. And when my third eye and my crown opened, it was like my spirit shot out of my body and went into the space of eternity. I spent my life on this one track mind that there was nothing more. And then I had this spiritual experience and I was so pissed that I was wrong. And then I started to hear these masculine voices and they were guiding me into the light. And they just kept saying, you are worthy of all the love in the universe. It definitely feels way better than where I just was, and I'm not going back. Or with this big empty grocery cart, and he said, okay, pick your life. My life growing up was very chaotic. I grew up in a very impoverished family, and everybody in my family is addicted to illicit substances and alcohol, and there's a lot of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and mental abuse. And that was my regular. I didn't realize that other children don't have lives like that. I thought that that was what everybody's life was like. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, mainly because there was never enough money to pay rent. So we were always getting evicted and having to pick up and leave. So it was really unstable foundation. I found at a very early age that I could start drinking and using drugs, and that would help me cope with all of the trauma that I was enduring. And so that's what I did. I spent my teenage years getting really heavily addicted to drugs, and my parents were also addicts, and they were very heavily addicted to drugs as well. And so my upbringing was super chaotic, and I experienced a really severe trauma in my early 20s. My parents decided that they were done using drugs. They wanted to end their suffering. And the only way that they knew to do that was to die. And so in 2007, my parents committed suicide together. They left these really short notes. They didn't explain much. It was also a great model of toxic codependency. My parents couldn't figure out how to live life together. And so they decided that they had to die together. And, you know, for the rest of my life after that trauma, my addiction became my parent. It was really loud. You know, there was two voices after my parents' suicide. One voice said, wow, you should stop using drugs. They just killed your parents. And the other voice, which was much more calm and convincing, said, you can't let go of drugs. It's all that you have left of them. What kind of daughter would you be if you let go of the legacy of your family? Despite how terrible the legacy is or how challenging the legacy is. So my addiction became my parent. It became my guiding star. It even branded me. I'm covered in tattoos of liquor bottles and packs of cigarettes. Like, this was my whole identity. This was my entire personality, was my addiction.
Because you're so open in sharing about your addiction, and thank you for doing that. Were you happy at the time? Did you find the relief you were looking for in addiction?
Well, I don't think I've ever really known what the emotion of happiness. I would say that I definitely had moments of chemically induced detachment. You know, I had a lot of pain that I definitely did not want to deal with or know how to deal with. And so in that way, I feel like drugs saved me, because I don't know if I would have been able to cope with these huge, uncomfortable feelings of grief and confusion and guilt and shame. And so for a while, I think that my addiction kind of saved me from myself. But then at some point it shifted, and I had moments of happiness, and it wasn't all super terrible. I mean, I stayed on drugs for 22 years. So, you know, at some point in my addiction, it was a party. It was fun. And then at some point it became fun with problems. And then after that, it became just problems. And it was like 2 full-time jobs keeping up with my addiction. And it was extremely tiring. And, yeah, that feeling of hopelessness was definitely my kind of main feeling for the last couple of years of active addiction.
You also, talked about your arms being branded and having tattoos and that being linked to your addiction. I also wanted to ask, because now when we're talking, your life has completely changed and is different. And of course, like, there's a choice in keeping your tattoos or getting some of them removed. And I think there might be a story behind why you chose to keep them.
Yeah, well, number one, it's really expensive and it's literally my whole arm. But I think even more than that, I don't necessarily want to forget. I mean, I'm never going to forget what my life was like before. Sometimes I think of the body as this learning device that we go through earth school with. And so, do you remember being in actual school and they would give you textbooks and you had to go home and cover your textbooks with some sort of cover, like a brown paper bag? And some of the kids would draw all over their brown paper bag, and some of them would keep it nice and clean. So for me, I feel like I covered all over my brown paper bag, and that's okay. It doesn't actually matter. When people ask me what my tattoos mean, I say they mean that I was once 18 years old and full of angst, and I didn't like my parents. Because that's kind of the extent of it. I haven't gotten a tattoo in like almost 25 years, which is a crazy sentence to say. I guess 20 years. I don't think that there's like some huge story on why I've kept them. I just haven't felt like it's something that I need to really visit.
And I think it also perhaps reminds you of, part of yourself and a part of your story that you've worked so hard to change.
Yeah. And it also makes me look cool. So there's that too.
Yeah, lots of benefits. Always wanted to have one actually, but I'm just so afraid of anything that's painful. Just so beyond afraid. It's just ridiculous. Even going to the dentist is just not a good idea. But moving on, I also wanted to get a bit into the poverty story, because I think oftentimes we find ourselves judging people or just questioning people's choices or judging people's choices. And I think coming from poverty, that's a trauma in itself, other than everything else. So would you speak a bit about how being a child and being impoverished affected you and how you moved through that?
That's a really great question. Yeah, my mentality was so stuck in lack because I didn't realize that there was another way to think. Number one, I was taught that you had to lie, cheat, and steal to get money. And I was also taught that it's very hard to keep money. And so my whole life growing up, that was my experience because that's what I was taught. And I think that just the instability of being a child and having to move once a year, or watching your mom steal your clothes and groceries, and always being in a constant state of fear that somebody was going to find out, or at some point thinking, oh, well, that's how we get groceries. We steal them. Like all of those feelings, they piled up on top of each other, so that when I became an adult, that was my go-to as well. I always stole my groceries, any sort of toiletry. I just thought that stores were my own personal closet and that I could just go in and steal them. I think that lack mentality being instilled in me in a really young age, that was probably one of the hardest barriers to overcome when I started to change my life and change my thoughts and utilize the law of attraction into my life to be able to manifest financial abundance, security, a home for myself. My addiction wrapped in with that lack poverty mentality brought me to homelessness. It brought me to great stages of degradation. I was a prostitute. That's how I made money to support my addiction. And yeah, so I think that they're very intertwined in my family, at least, that idea of poverty and addiction kind of going hand in hand.
And how did that lead to your near-death experience?
Yeah, so I had this really spiritually transformative experience in March of 2019 due to an overdose of drugs. And that's where I had this white light moment. I have some language for it today. What I experienced was a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. And if you don't know what Kundalini energy is, that's okay. Neither did I. Kundalini roughly translates into life force. So I had a life force energy activation awakening where all of my chakra systems, which is your spiritual body, became activated and online all at the exact same moment. So I had this burst of energy going up and down my body. And when my third eye and my crown opened, it was like my spirit shot out of my body and went into the space of eternity. Do you want me to share some of the experience?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. So, I'll preface it with this. I was a militant atheist before my experience because of all of the challenges in my life, because I was poor, because I was a drug addict, because I was a prostitute, because my parents had committed suicide. All of those things made me hide from God, the universe, the creator, whatever language resonates for you. So I spent my life completely on this one track mind that there was nothing more. And then I had this spiritual experience and I was so pissed that I was wrong. That's like the first emotion that I really remember going into the experience. I remember being like, I can't believe that I'm wrong. This is crazy. Part of my experience was a life review. And I'm not just a traumatized person. I am a traumatized person who traumatized other people. Let me make that very clear. I caused mountains and lots of harm to others.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I want to talk about my life review. And in my life review, I experienced all of the pain that I had caused other people from their point of view. And also feeling that feeling of me being this really dominant, aggressive, mean-hearted person to them. So my experience in my life review almost felt like I was stuck in hell, or what people describe hell to be like. There is no such thing. But it felt so dense and so dark and so weighted because I was experiencing the harm that I had caused other people. And I also experienced my parents' suicide, not only from the experience of a grieving daughter, but also from their point of view as well. And that ocean of anguish that I was drowning in was so overwhelming. Again, it felt like I was trapped in some sort of hell. I was stuck in the most murky shadow of experience and emotion. And then I started to hear these masculine voices, and they were guiding me into the light. And they just kept saying, you are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe. And so I started to follow those voices, and I found myself in the space of life between lives. So I found myself, it almost felt like a workshop, and I started to be downloaded with all this information and all these scenes. And the first piece of information that I was downloaded with was that I'm a spiritual soldier. I've been sent to Earth on a mission. I'm here with thousands of other souls in my particular branch of this spiritual army. That language kind of sounds scary. It's not anything like we're at war. It's like freedom and liberation from this level of consciousness. I found myself being told by my commander, and you can call that commander Christ or Krishna, Buddha, some sort of higher entity, an ascended master, because they're all the same entity. It's all the same teaching. And this commander was saying that we were getting ready to jump to Earth for our mission, and everybody was super excited and pumped. And then my awareness went to another scene, and I found myself in front of this table of beings, and they had this big golden book, and they were thumbing through it. And they said, okay, it's nice to see you. You're not meant to stay. You're just here for some information. And I'm looking all around me, and I'm like, you guys aren't talking to me, are you? Because I don't know where I am, but it definitely feels way better than where I just was. And I'm not going back to where I just was. And they're thumbing through the book, and they're dismissing what I'm saying. And they just keep repeating, nope, you're not meant to stay. You're only here for information. And then they took me through the details of my pre-birth plan. They showed me that I, as a soul, had actually constructed my life before I came to Earth. And the way that I saw it in my mind's eye, it looked a lot like a grocery store and a video game. And there was a man there, and he was guiding me through the aisles of this grocery store with this big empty grocery cart. And he said, okay, pick your life. And so I start grabbing all of these cereal boxes, and on each cereal box is a life experience. And I'm grabbing everything, every experience, sexual trauma, homelessness, prostitution, addiction. And I'm also grabbing things that I haven't experienced in my life yet at that point in time. So boxes that say recovery, overcoming, triumph, spiritual awakening, being an author, being a leader, but none of that stuff had happened yet. So it didn't resonate. In this moment of being downloaded with the pre-birth plan, it was like 2 tons of bondage had been released from my spirit. I was no longer a victim to my circumstance. I was actually a divine co-creator of my experience. Things had no longer happened to me. They had actually happened for me, because on some soul level, I had chosen it for the evolvement of myself. Now, my human cannot understand how an experience like being born into the family line that I've been born into, or being molested as a small child, could evolve me as a spirit. But today I live in unwavering faith that everything is happening in divine right order. My soul has got it and is not going to let any harm come to me. No real harm. Experience is not harm. Like nothing can actually happen to my spirit inside of this human vessel. So yeah, like that belief, that knowing, it's a knowing for me, but it can be a belief for other people if they haven't had an experience where they've seen it. That knowing of the pre-birth plan has given me so much freedom to catalyst me onto a different path in my life today.
A beautiful, beautiful story. And because I definitely do see how in the rear view mirror we can understand why we've gone through challenges, why we've had the difficult experiences we've had. And I also wanted to put this into perspective, for the people listening, for whatever their challenge or difficult experience in the past may have been, maybe similar to yours, maybe not. But how do you see this process of our soul then choosing experiences, and on what basis? Why are we choosing different experiences?
Well, I think that heaven is really boring because we only do one thing all the time, and that's live in unconditional love and light. And so I believe that we come to earth for this experience of duality. And sometimes I compare it to a roller coaster. Think about going to an amusement park and going on a roller coaster. You wait in line for a tremendously long amount of time to go on a 40-second ride. And I think that after I'm done with my ride, I get off and I go, man, that was really fun. I want to go on it again. But instead of sitting up in the front seat this time, I'm going to sit in the back seat. And instead of sitting next to this friend, I'm going to sit next to that friend. And so I think that it's really just about this experience, just to have a human experience and to experience duality. For me, I believe that one of the main lessons that I came here to learn was to forget. To get so far away from the remembrance of who I actually am, which is a divine spirit living a temporary human experience, and to come back to that awareness, because the remembrance is the miracle. The remembrance is heaven. So, I've signed up for a lot of situations to really take me far away from remembering that I'm a sovereign divine being.
You get this information through your near-death experience, but at the time, your life was probably not where you wanted it to be. So how do you come back, and how do you make sense of what happened? How do you feel afterwards?
Yeah. Well, I wrote my whole experience off as drug-induced psychosis. All I knew was that I took a bunch of drugs and then I thought I was talking to God. So I just ignored the whole experience. Number one, because I don't believe in things like that. I don't believe that things like that could happen. So why would I just all of a sudden change my whole belief system? It wouldn't happen in an instant like that. And it didn't. And so I just went on living my life the way that I was, which was lying, manipulating, stealing, prostituting myself, degrading myself, looking for money so that I could get drugs to medicate and sedate myself. And then the universe, my higher power, source, my angels, my guides, again, whatever language resonates. I enjoy all of that language. So the universe conspired to get me onto a different path. I had been exposed to my life plan, and I knew that recovery was one of those cereal boxes. And so since I wasn't getting onto the path myself, my guides, my angels led me onto the path. So like all of these crazy divine signs and synchronicities, or at the time I was calling them coincidences, started to take place in my life. For instance, all of my drug dealers decided on the exact same day that they were no longer going to sell drugs. These were people that did not know each other. I called like 10 different guys, and every single one of them had some story about how they were out of the game and that they were no longer going to do this. And it was bizarre. So then I had no way to get what I needed. And I had a physical dependency to heroin, and I needed those drugs to not get sick. And I had no way to get them. And I was on day 3 of withdrawal, and I was so sick. I was sicker than I had ever been in my 20 plus years of using opiates. And I remember I had this moment of mental and spiritual suicide where I said, damn, I'm so sick that I can't even kill myself. I can't even get out of this bed and figure out a way to kill myself. And in that moment, I really understood what my parents had gone through, because that emotional and physical pain is so overwhelming. And the worst part about it is that there's actually nothing physically wrong with you. It feels like your body is being put through a meat grinder, but there's nothing physically actually going on. It's all inside my mind. All the receptors in my mind are totally twisted. And so it makes me think that I'm in pain. I had this moment of it was the gift of desperation. And the acronym for that is God. And GOD, gift of desperation. And I heard this voice in my head, and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And I was in the throes of desperation. So I was like, okay, strange voice, fix me. I don't want to be physically dependent to heroin. And then I saw these 2 little men appear in my mind's eye. I still see them every time I tell the story. Hello. And they were wearing these white lab coats, and they had these little lawnmowers. And they started mapping out the crevices of my mind. And they were walking through with these lawnmowers, and it felt like they were plowing something out. And as they walked through, I felt these intense hot tingles. And then there was this bright white flash when they were done, and this feeling of X's being put across my forehead. And in this bright white flash, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. I mean, like, I was sick all over myself moments before from both ends, sweating, writhing in pain, welcoming death. It felt like my bones were made of fire and that my skin was made of broken glass. It was the most painful, intense experience. And then all of a sudden, in one instant, I was completely well and healed and fine. And I threw myself on the ground, and I was crying out to a creator that I didn't believe in. And I was saying, how could this be happening to me? I don't believe in this. I don't believe in you. I don't understand what's happening. And, I said, you could not have picked a more unworthy subject to bestow this kind of grace on. And just for the contrast, one more time, I was a drug addict. I was an orphan to suicide. I was an atheist. I was a prostitute, a liar, a manipulator, a thief. I was a racist. I was a rapist. I had caused mountains and mountains of harm and trauma to other people. And here I was being bestowed with the grace of the divine. And I felt so unworthy. And I felt this flood of unworthiness try to take over me. And it was quickly combated away by the light, by the healing light that was all over me at the moment. And so after that experience, I realized that my experience in heaven was a true one. I obviously thought I was the second coming of Christ. I like went out on the streets of New York trying to heal people with just my hands because I figured if it happened to me, I could probably do it to other people. And I was just like touching strangers on the street. It was crazy and super chaotic. But I had this newfound faith inside of me that I didn't know what to do with. And I knew that I had to do recovery, but I didn't know how to do that because I had never seen anybody in recovery in my life. I didn't have a physical dependency to heroin anymore, but I still had major mental addictions to my behaviors, to other substances, to other manifestations of addiction in my life. And I found myself on this train and it was completely empty, which is bizarre in New York City for a whole train car to be empty. And I was really just so confused and so desperate for whatever the next step was. And this man came into the train car and he sat directly across from me, even though the whole train car was empty. And when he sat down, I saw that he was wearing a Narcotics Anonymous necklace, a 12-step fellowship necklace. And I heard a voice in my head and it said, "That's your path, follow him to a meeting." And so I did. And I've been clean ever since that man came into my life and sat across from me. And I asked this stranger to take me to an NA meeting with him. And I went to a few more meetings over the next couple of days. And I went to a women's meeting the next day. And I didn't look the way that I look now at this point of time in my life. I looked destroyed. I was super skinny. My skin was gray. My eyes were dead and sunken in. I had huge holes all over my face because I had picked myself because I thought that bugs lived inside of me. Every time I used, I would feel bugs inside my skin. So I would cut myself open with razor blades and burn myself with lighters trying to get them out. And I was missing most of my teeth. Thank you, recovery, and my spiritual team for helping me buy teeth in my life. But I looked really destroyed when I came into this process. And I walked into this women's meeting and this woman held me so tight as soon as I walked in because she could tell that I had really been through the ringer. And she whispered in my ear and she said, "You are worthy of all the love in the universe. You are worthy of all the love in the universe." And that's the same message that I heard on my path into the light in my spiritual experience. And I just knew that it was my path, that I was meant to do recovery, that I was meant to be in this particular 12-step fellowship. And I melted into that woman and I cried. And it was I laid my head in her big boobies for as long as she would let me. And that was a really deep moment of spiritual surrender for me. I really let go of the fact that I don't know about anything. I thought that I knew a lot of stuff in my life. And in this moment, I realized that I don't know anything. And it seemed like everything was perfectly constructed and crafted for me to get onto this path. And that made me feel divinely supported and guided. And I've felt that way ever since.
It's such a beautiful story and the way you say it as well. And also what I want to commend you for is I think you talk about the experiences that you've previously had and you're just very open about it. You're very matter of fact, this happened, I've done this. So you own up to it. But I also know in the society that we live in, especially when we put things like this online, there's a lot of judgment. And there's a few parts of your story, I won't go into them, where you're opening yourself up to judgment, which first of all, I want to say it's incredibly brave of you because you do not have to share that, but you choose to do so. For me, you have the utmost respect and love for being able to talk about it. But how do you deal with the opinions of others? How do you deal with the judgment of people?
Sometimes when I tell the story, people are like, "Wow, you're so courageous to say all that crazy stuff about you." And I never really see it that way. Well, number one, I think one of the main things that I took away from my experience in eternity was that it actually felt like I was waking up from a dream. Like, when you wake up from an actual dream and you can only maybe grab 3 to 5 seconds of the dream. Well, for me, when I woke up in the state of eternity, it felt like I could only remember one experience. out of 35 years of life at that point in time. So that one experience that I remembered was that my parents had committed suicide. And I woke up in eternity and I was like, damn, that was such a weird dream. Did my parents kill themselves? That was crazy. And that was it out of 35 years of life. So every second of my life that I spent worrying about what I look like, worrying about what other people think of me, worrying about just like all of these really trivial things, I didn't take any of that to eternity with me. Another thing is that I know that the world that we live in is a dream. I study A Course in Miracles. That's a metaphysical text channeled by Jesus. It's a reprogramming, and it's probably the spiritual text that I resonate with the most. And in that, it tells me that I live inside of an illusion. This is a dream. So the same way that I wouldn't care about somebody judging me in an actual dream, I just thought, why would I care about what people have to say about me here? And I think one of the main other things is that I'm talking about transformation. I'm talking about transforming addiction into recovery. I'm talking about transforming racism into unity. I'm talking about transforming hurt into healing. And I think that those things are really important. And, I could try to sound real cool and smart and talk about all of the spiritual tools. But if I don't tell you that I have personal experience with transmuting negative energy, why would you believe anything that I have to say? Like, for me anyway, it wouldn't impact me as independently, or like it wouldn't impact me as personally if I didn't know that somebody else had experience with this. And so I lay it all out there because the world isn't even real, guys. There's no need to get super wrapped up in it.
And I have to say, A Course in Miracles is something that came on my path a few years back, but by then I thought like, oh, it might be a bit difficult. And I keep hearing, I think the last few weeks I keep hearing about it more and more. So it's definitely something that I feel is just a sign to look into for myself as well.
Yeah, I go to a study group for it because it is very challenging to understand. It kind of reads like stereo instructions. So I found a group of individuals that we read the book together and we kind of consciously contemplate what it could mean.
So then moving on to, how you started the path on recovery, right? You went to that meeting. And you sort of, what I also want to stress is everything you knew about life, about how to fend for yourself, like how to provide for yourself, like everything you've almost had to learn again from zero, because the things you were doing before, they didn't bring you to a good place. So how did that trajectory pan out?
Today, I live my life aligned with spiritual principles of honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, tolerance, acceptance, unconditional love. And so living your life as a thief or a prostitute doesn't typically align with that. Not for me anyway, it doesn't. So I had to learn how to live my life from a more spiritual perspective. And not intentionally cause harm to other people or businesses or however. So, it wasn't like, oh, I had this really transformative experience and now I'm all the way healed. It was, I had to reprogram myself. I had to learn how to do life all over again. And the way that I did that was I went into a long-term treatment facility in Brooklyn, New York, where I live. And I'll share about how I found my way in there because it's very magical. So I was going to these 12-step meetings, and I went to one meeting and there was a woman in there. She was the program director of this women's rehab. And, she just so happened to be there. I happened to notice her. I had just had all of these thoughts about how am I ever going to do this? How am I going to learn how to live life from a totally different way? This is such a daunting, huge task. I'm never going to be able to do it. And I had all of this self-doubt creeping in. And then I see this woman in the meeting and I was like, okay, that's the sign. I'm supposed to talk to her and I'm supposed to ask her to help me. I know it. But I didn't know how to do that. How do you ask a stranger to help you? And so all throughout the meeting, I was getting my courage up and I could see this little version of me in my mind's eye. And she said, I'm your courage. I'm here to help you. And she was like doing push-ups and jumping jacks. And she was like, we're going to live a new life. Come on, let's go. And I was so nervous. I was so scared. And when the meeting was over, I felt totally amped because I had been talking to my courage this whole time. And so I was all lit up. I was all ready to go. And I walk over to where the woman is, and she's gone. She left the meeting early. And I felt so defeated. And I walked with my head hanging to the bus, just totally like I had missed my opportunity to go on to the next part of my journey. And so with my head hanging, I stepped onto the bus to go home. And when I stepped onto the bus, that woman was sitting right there. She left the meeting early and was somehow on the exact same bus as me, not at the bus stop in front of the meeting because that's where I was. And I ran up to her totally insane and manic. And I was like, oh my God, I think that you're an angel. You're sent to earth. You're here to help me. I wanted to talk to you in there. But of course I couldn't talk to you in there because you're here. And this is so divine. And I can't believe it. And I think that you're supposed to help me. Will you help me? Please, please, please. And she looked at me so calm. And she said, yeah, we can help you. Come by tomorrow. We have a bed. And I did. I went to that program the very next day with just the clothes on my back. I had nothing to take. And I started my journey of reprogramming inside of a women's rehab. And I had to learn everything over again. And, I had this newfound faith. So like the whole time in treatment, I'm telling these other 25 women who are all also healing from their addiction and did not have some sort of near-death-like experience. I'm like, guys, it's all about the stars and the moon and the sky and God loves you. And everybody's like, girl, please shut up. Okay. We do not want to hear this. People were really going through it, and like my positivity was like toxic because I wasn't dealing with the underlying wounds because I was so elated to have this new perspective. And so it took me a lot of time, number one, to ground myself into the spiritual experience. Okay, I'm a spirit, but I still have to have a human experience. And even though I don't identify with my past anymore, my body, this human that I'm inside of, it still went through the ringer. And so I have to address the physical trauma that's happened to this vessel on top of all of the emotional and mental trauma as well. And so it took me a long time to ground myself. And I spent a lot of time in self-sabotaging behavior, not understanding how to be part of a community. One of the rules inside of that rehab was that you had to ask somebody who had been there longer to go into the refrigerator for you. And I was like, this rule is so ridiculous. I'm a grown woman. I know how to use a refrigerator. But I see now in hindsight that it wasn't about the refrigerator. It was about asking for help. I had to ask somebody who knew more than me to help me. And so now I'm in this constant practice of always asking for help. And I think that was one of the main things that I really needed to learn, because for my whole life, I felt like it's just me. I have to fend for myself. I'm on my own. And I'm not. So not only do I ask other people for help, but I also check in with my higher power for help. I ask my spirit team for help. And now I have this constant practice of doing that. So my reprogramming came by that constant state of spiritual surrender. Whenever I think I know something, I surrender again because I don't know anything.
And I have to say, I also resonate a lot with that independence, wanting to do everything yourself, like wanting to achieve everything yourself. And I don't resonate a lot with the feeling alone, but I will tell you, I hate asking for help. And I know that just because I hate it inside and it triggers me, like that's exactly what I need to do for growth.
So annoying. Those spiritual lessons that come up and trigger us. Oh, yes, I identify.
Absolutely. Just to bring it back to the audience, for people that are in the place that you were when you went to that rehab at that point, what's the best thing they can do at the time?
Yeah, I think that if you're somebody who's struggling with addiction, there's so many different kinds of addiction too, right? Like our society is one of distraction. And there's so many different ways to sedate and medicate your feelings. But if you're somebody who's dealing specifically with substance use issues, or I'm also in eating disorder recovery as well, the best thing that you can do is find a community. I know that from my own spiritual experience, I know that I came here with a tribe of other souls. I saw myself in that jump team coming to Earth to come and liberate consciousness on the planet. And so for me, it was really important for me to find those other people. Again, you're not alone. You might feel alone in the desperation of the addiction, because that's what addiction does. It isolates us from the world, from other people, from our families, from our spirit. But it's just not true. It's a lie. And you don't have to subscribe to that lie if you don't want to. So for me, one of the huge tools that I use in my recovery journey is I go to 12-step meetings. I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and there's virtual meetings. So if you feel uncomfortable or you live in a part of the world where there aren't a lot of physical meetings, you can hop online and you can find a meeting to go to 24 hours a day. You never have to be alone with the thoughts of your addiction. And I always encourage people to personally reach out to me. If you're somebody that hears this, please reach out so that I can connect you to community. If I can't be a part of your life individually, I can at least shepherd you to a community.
That's very helpful for people going through at any stage of recovery. And I know that I have a very close friend who has gone through substance abuse. I know for him, and that's what I also wanted to bring it back to, he's constantly hated having this addiction. Now, I have to say he's a very functioning addict. So unless he will tell you point blank that he has this issue, you would not know. I wouldn't have known had he not confided in me. Super good job, super good results at university. You would think the guy has it all. But for many, many years, he's just been, and it's always been this part of his life that he's hated about himself. And there's this almost hidden, hatred of, you almost look at yourself from outside of yourself and you think like, who is that awful human being? And they need to be so terrible to do that to themselves and so weak to be unable to escape. The reason I say this is because I think having been through what you've been through and having now found recovery, I don't think you look back at Betty at 18 or at 20 years old thinking like, oh, that was an awful person. She was a weak person. I probably think you look at her with a lot of respect and thinking she's done the best she could back then. So could you speak a bit about how you see people going through recovery and what you think of yourself back then?
18-year-old me is, a version of me who's just unaware. And yeah, she's only using the tools that she's been exposed to. And so of course I don't hold any ill will towards her because she didn't even know. Now, I was also a very functioning addict for many years of my life. I was on drugs for 22 years. And so there was lots of years where I had apartments. I've been married, I had a regular life. But what I've been taught in recovery is that addiction is a form of dis-ease. So the same way that I wouldn't yell at somebody for getting cancer or diabetes, I wouldn't condemn somebody for being subjected to addiction. Now, because I have this knowing in pre-birth planning, I truly believe that people sign up for the soul lesson of addiction. And you don't have to subscribe to that thought system if you don't want to, because it takes ownership. And sometimes that can be really triggering. But for me, I believe that we sign up for it. So I have multiple jobs, but one of them is that I work in a clinic in Harlem in New York, and I deal with people with substance use disorders all day. All that I can do is being a shining testimony that recovery is possible. If recovery is possible for me, it is literally possible for anybody. I mean, yeah, you can go on my social media and see before and after pictures. If that person can recover, then anybody can, literally. So generally, when I see people with addiction issues, I'm always kind of holding a spiritual perspective, like, wow, that soul is very strong. That soul signed up for a super intense lesson. I know that they're going to get it. And I hold the vision that they will achieve the transmutation of their soul lesson. I really, truly do. I know that if I can, they can. One of the tools that I use to help me in my recovery that I think is worth mentioning is I dissect the pieces of myself. So my addiction was my main mask that I went through life with. And so I've given my addiction a name, a shape, a face, a voice, because I need to recognize that I am not my addiction. So my addiction's name is Richard. He's a gay man. He thinks he's so fun, but he's a mess. And he lives inside of this glass house inside my mind so that I can differentiate when a thought is coming from Richard or a thought is coming from my higher self. This glass house, and so there's seams inside the house, and so every once in a while he'll press his mouth up to the seam of the house and he'll yell like, look at all those people in the bar, they're having so much fun, let's go have a drink with them. And I'm like, no, Richard, we don't drink anymore, remember, we're not doing that. And the idea is that I can't banish him. Like right now he lives in a glass house because like I'm still very early in recovery. I've only been in recovery for a little over 4.5 years. So, you know, he still is kind of like caged up a little bit, but eventually I hope to integrate him enough where I recognize that he thought that he was keeping me safe. He didn't want me to walk through this other door because the other door of recovery was unknown. And so he just thought that he was keeping me safe. And in a way he was. And I think that he played his role exactly how he was supposed to in my life. But for me, it really helps to dissect those pieces of myself so that I can see that they're not actually me. And I have done character development around all the pieces of myself. I have an inner saboteur, an inner controller, an inner critic. I have an inner child. I've developed my light in the same way. So I've developed my higher self, my whole spirit team, my angels, my guides, all using character development and giving them all these personality profiles.
I think that's potentially something really interesting that a lot of us can use, right? Character development. Could you walk us through, like, if we have this, you know, one thought, maybe one drink wouldn't kill me, or maybe I do this just for today, you know, and tomorrow then we start clean, or we start clean on Monday. How would you go through that, and how would you build a character around it, and how would you deal with a character?
I deal with those thoughts because I'm not cured. I am still a person who has the dis-ease of addiction. The dis-ease of addiction is incurable, but I have medicine that I take on a daily basis. My medicine is connection to others. I truly believe that the antidote to addiction is connection. And so for me, I stay really vigilant in being connected. So when I have a thought like, well, one drink isn't going to kill me, you know, like, but for me, I have to play the tape all the way through. So, okay, let's say that I go and I have one drink. Then what happens? Then maybe I'll have another drink, or because I don't know moderation, because I'm an addict and because it's all or nothing, you know, like one drink will lead me to smoking meth and shooting heroin. So I don't want that to be the end of the tape. So instead, I just cut the tape off before it even begins. Now, if you're already in the cycle of addiction, my suggestion with the people that I work with, especially in my private coaching business, is your thoughts are on this one track mind. So you're going around in this one circle. If you can deter the thought, even if it's only for half a second. So generally with addiction, it's like, I have a feeling. I don't want to feel this feeling. And so I medicate, sedate, use drugs, and then it happens all over again. So I say that when you have a feeling and you decide that you want to use drugs, make a phone call to somebody, send a text message, watch a video, do 10 jumping jacks, do something to knock that thought off of its course. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't hop back onto the track. I mean, most of the time, especially in early recovery, you will hop back onto the track. So I have a thought, I don't want to feel, I'm going to use drugs. Now, instead, I'm going to say, I have a thought, I don't want to feel, I'm going to do 10 jumping jacks, I'm going to go use drugs. Or I'm going to call somebody, I'm going to connect to somebody, I'm going to hop onto a 12-step meeting. I'm going to do something to reroute that thought. An obsessive thought arcs at 15 minutes. If you can get through 15 minutes after having the obsessive thought, it will completely vanish. It will disperse. Like, this is scientifically proven. I dealt with a lot of issues with food after letting go of my drug addiction. So, you know, like, it wouldn't be like, oh, I want to go smoke meth. It would be like, I want to eat a slice of pizza. And the thought would be so obsessive. And if I could just deter myself for 15 minutes by being of service to somebody else, that always really helps with dismantling my obsessive thoughts. Or like doing something physically inside my body, like exercising for those 15 minutes, or like dancing, or, you know, even something like drawing or coloring, like sitting with my inner child. If I could just sit still with that obsessive thought and wait for it to arc and then crash, I was able to really utilize that tool a lot as well, and letting go of those obsessive thoughts surrounding addiction.
And I have to say, like, I relate to the part of like when I have feelings, like I often would go to sweets, because it's a form of, and I didn't really think it's a form of addiction until I was reading into it. And you have this feeling, like you're feeling sad or you're disappointed, and then that's the thing that you go to, that because you've gone to it before. So then that's the go-to, and you feel like, okay, you've disappointed me, so now I have to go get ice cream. And my way of dealing with that was, I can have it if I want to, but it's not going to be to numb that feeling. And for me, a very big thing was also feeling my feelings, because I always tended to think, you're weak for having feelings, you're weak for showing feelings, emotions, everything. You just have to mask it. The more people know about you, the more they can attack you, the more vulnerable you are, which is not good. So you just have to, not show it, not everything, and to deal with feelings the best you can, and then move forward. And a big shift for me has definitely been, feeling my feelings, being sad if I'm sad, being disappointed if I'm disappointed, and not really having to have a good explanation for why I'm sad or anything.
Yeah, I feel called to share about the fact that it's not just the depressing or sad feelings that we try to medicate and sedate with food or technology or sex, or however, our distraction manifests. It's also part of our society and like in culture that we celebrate by medicating and sedating ourselves. So it can be a feeling of joy and elation. And it's like, okay, let's eat a whole cake, or let's go out and eat food that might not be like great for us, or let's go drink champagne. We're celebrating. So I think that it's so ingrained in our culture. And I'm not saying that this is for everybody. Some people can have one glass of champagne or one slice of cake and be totally fine. For me, as a person in recovery and a person who identifies as a recovering addict, I don't know how to do those things. And right now I'm 4 months off of sugar. And the sugar detox for me was like nearly as painful as the heroin detox. I mean, not physically painful, but mentally it was so intense. And I just want to share this one other tool that I use, because I think it can be really helpful. I went to a hypnotherapist because I could not stop treating food, specifically sugar, as a drug to medicate and sedate my feelings. I have this great sense of unworthiness that lives within me, like the programming that I grew up with. And so when good things happen to me, I'm always quick to self-sabotage, or in this case, what I was doing was I was sedating myself with sugar. Like, wow, all these good things are happening. Let me eat a tray of muffins. And so I went to a hypnotherapist, and he really helped me start to rewire that I went and saw a professional because I couldn't do it on my own. So I just want to throw that tool out there as well. If you're somebody that's dealing with obsessive thoughts, hypnotherapy is really a great tool.
I have to say, like, I myself am looking into it for past life regression as well. Because I have this just ridiculous fear that I've never been able to get rid of. And it's just the stupidest thing, like super ridiculous. But somebody pointed out it might be something that I'm carrying over from a past life, and it might have been important then, and it just triggers me now. So it's possible that I'll do that in the coming months. Really, really good. Betty, one thing I also wanted to get into was connecting with people, because I can imagine from your background, you've seen probably the worst of human connection that there is. And I can imagine coming from that into who you are today and building a new life for yourself. You have to trust people. You have to be able to connect with them. You have to be vulnerable. How have you managed to find these things within yourself after having been through everything that you've been through?
I developed this faith in my life that's completely unwavering, almost to a fault. And when I first had my awakening and started coming into spiritual awareness, I trusted everything. Everything. I got scammed. Like, I mean, I had no money, but I was getting these phone calls from like telemarketers, and they were saying, "Oh, if you sign up for our program, all you have to do is click ads and you get paid money." And I was like, "This is God. God is presenting me with an opportunity to make money. Thank you, God." And then they're like, "All you have to do is send us $250. So then I'm scrounging to try to find $250 to send internet scammers. But my awareness was so blasted open that I just decided to trust everybody. So I exercise that beautiful spiritual principle of discernment in my life today. I have to like weigh things out. And I need to not get too wrapped up in the fact that I truly believe that everything that's meant for me is going to find its way to me. Even hard lessons like that, like understanding that I can get scammed if I'm too blasted open. So for me, connecting with other people now in an intimate way, it feels much better than isolating myself or thinking that people are innately bad. So today I switch my thought around, and I believe that people are innately good, but people are also traumatized and they grow up in different backgrounds and cultures that I might not understand. And so they behave out of those things. But at our core, we're all divine spiritual beings. We are nothing but light and love. And so sometimes when I hear about unrest in the world, because I don't watch the news, because I have no business watching the news. When I hear about the unrest in the world and how uncomfortable people are feeling in their human experience, I try to remember that every single one of us was once a baby. We were once this completely sort of helpless ball of unconditional love, and that people have grown up in a society that's kind of structured to make us forget so that we can remember. And I truly believe that if I have awoken, everybody's gonna. I mean, I really hold that vision. I know that the Great Awakening is well underway. And so I set intention. Like for me, I write these little Post-it notes all over my house. They're like everywhere. This one says, "Send me the women I will have personal relationships with in my life." And whenever I see it, I say it out loud because I invite spirit to send me the people that I'm meant to be with. And I've found so many members of my soul tribe on this journey just by setting intention. And it's not every person that I meet, although I do feel spiritually connected to every living being because of the law of oneness. But I have found the members of my particular soul tribe, the people that I came to earth to learn lessons with. And I'm open to source sending me more of those people. And sometimes the lessons suck. Sometimes they're lessons of rejection and hurt and abandonment or annoyance. And like all my triggers get triggered all at once with certain people. But I know that those are also soul lessons. And so if I just show up for class and do what I'm meant to do, I can get over the class, graduate, and move on to the next lesson. So for me, it's just about really opening my heart up to source and trusting that everybody that finds their way to me is meant for me.
It's so beautiful. It connects a bit to, sharing earlier the reason why I'm doing this podcast, but also whilst I've always had faith in God and I was raised Christian, I don't think I was very spiritual. It was always something that scared me a lot. And for some reason, this didn't scare me. So I sat with it for a long time. And then I thought, well, there might be something there for me if I feel compelled to do that and if I move forward. But what I also wanted to ask you, Betty, when you say about, talking to your guys, like asking for signs, asking for guidance, how can we do that? And keep in mind, we have an audience, of people that may be dealing with grief, maybe dealing with depression. They might be on the road of addiction like you were. How do we tune in and listen to our guides? How can we reach them?
It's a great question. And I don't think that there's one answer for every person. I believe in spiritual autonomy. So some people might find a different path to do this, but I'm going to share what my path has been like. So number one, I have let go of things that I feel lower my frequency. So I eat clean. I'm a gluten-free, sugar-free vegan. I only drink water, and I drink about a gallon of water a day, which is super excessive. You don't have to do what I do. I exercise my physical body, and I try to do one thing for self-development each day. So whether that's being of service to somebody or journaling or maybe reading a verse of something and writing about what I think of it, something like that. So those are the things that I believe give me a higher vibration so that I can connect to my spirit team more easily. Now, again, this is just me. I'm not claiming this truth for everybody. Your system of beliefs might be different. So number one, I do a lot of free writing. So you can just take a pen and a piece of paper and just say, Spirit, speak through me. And like whatever weird stuff starts to come out, just let it come out. If you feel like it's you doing it, that's okay. Just keep going with it. I also think that it's really about faith and belief. So I read this great book called The Universe Has Your Back by Gabrielle Bernstein. In that book, she says that you can ask the universe any question and you can request a sign, whatever the first thing that pops into your head is. And if that question, like if it's for your highest good, this question that you've presented to the universe, that your sign will manifest in 24 hours. And I'll just share a personal experience that happened with me with this. So when I first came across this teaching and this exercise, I had a question about some guy. I'm like always wasting all of my spiritual questions about some guy. And I was like, is this guy for my highest good? And the first thing that popped into my head was a squirrel. And this was the middle of winter in New York City. There was snow on the ground. And I was so mad that I had picked a squirrel, or that was the first thing that came into my mind. And so I like freaked out. I was like, what a dummy. Why would you pick a squirrel? There's no squirrels. It's winter. And so I just forgot about the exercise. And I went to go see this guy because I wanted to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And so as I was walking to this guy's house, I was watching the snow crunch beneath my shoes, totally focused on my feet. And then all of a sudden, as soon as I was coming up to his house, a squirrel ran right across my feet and went up this tree. And so I'm staring at this squirrel right in its face. It's totally just parked on the tree, looking at me. I'm looking at it. I have my headphones in and I'm listening to a song about soulmates and twin flames. And then I turn my head to the right and the guy is outside of his house waiting for me. So it was this whole little movie that played out. The spiritual sign, the soundtrack in my ears, and then my leading man, this Adonis, just waiting for me right across the way. And it was such a super blessed moment. It was my first time that I had ever manifested my reality, that I had ever really received a tangible sign after requesting it. And so I was just blown away. And the next day after that, I was walking down the street and there was this abandoned book on top of a mailbox. And I just had this really strong feeling of intuition that that book was there for me. And so I walked over to the mailbox. I picked up the book. I opened it up to a random page. And the title of the chapter that I opened up the book to was entitled The Squirrel. These big, huge words staring me right in the face. I mean, my head exploded, like melted out of my ears. I fell into a puddle on the ground. I could not believe that I was looking at the words, the squirrel, inside of a random book. The next day after that, too, it always happens in threes for me. I was walking down the street. Again, I'm not expecting to see any physical squirrels because it's the middle of winter and it's snowing outside. And then on the bottom of a lamppost was a gigantic sticker of a squirrel. You know, the lesson that I take away from that, number one, is that it doesn't matter how I think my sign is going to manifest. I thought that I had to see a physical squirrel, that would be the sign. And the universe conspired in this super beautiful way to bring me my sign in all of these different ways. So it opened me up to that surrender of letting go of how I think things will manifest. Also, I asked if this guy was for my highest good. I didn't ask if we were going to get married and have a million babies and like live happily ever after. I said, is this for my highest good? And it was for my highest good, but not for the reason that I thought. So like my ego thinks, oh, highest good means new relationship, love and light. It's going to be so great. No, it was for my highest good because it was this awesome soul lesson in rejection. And that was a brutal, brutal one. Cause I kept like, he didn't want to be with me. And I kept saying, but what about all the squirrels? And he was like, what are you talking about? You sound totally psychotic. But anyway, so that's my story about asking and receiving signs. And I know that it's possible for anybody. So ask the universe a question, pick a sign. If it's for your highest good, it will manifest within 24 hours.
I love that. And I'll definitely do it as well. Betty, what I want to end with is you're so knowledgeable on spiritual resources, tools that we can use to get better. How can people connect with you, and what kind of tools or books or anything would you recommend for people just looking to, I think, progress in their spiritual journey?
Awesome. Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that compliment. I'm knowledgeable. Okay. So I would definitely say, please reach out to me. I'd love to connect you to like whatever spirit sort of leads me to in my intuition. I have a private coaching business. Obviously, I'd love to work with anybody that feels called to work personally with me. But, you know, and I think that investing in yourself to have a coach, I have a coach, you know, like I think that it's really a great tool to further your spiritual development. If you're not able to afford the services of a coach, I'd recommend a couple of books. The first one, the book that I just mentioned, The Universe Has Your Back by Gabrielle Bernstein. Amazing, amazing book to really get a good foundation in spirituality. And she's also in recovery. So I really identify with her in that. And she's a teacher of A Course in Miracles as well, but she makes it very digestible. Another book that really helped me on my trauma healing was a book called Heal Your Inner Wounds by Abby Wynn. It's really about that, the tools that I was talking about, the dissecting of self, like talking to your inner child, your inner teenager, your inner young adult, your shadow, your light, your divine feminine, your divine masculine, all of these things. So I would definitely recommend that book as well. And then, you know, if you're looking for recovery support, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on all social media. My handle is buddhabetty. It's a play on words. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and I would love to be able to shepherd you to a community.
So please do reach out if you feel called to do so. Awesome. Betty, I could easily talk to you for a couple more hours for sure, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing everything.
Thank you. Thanks for this space.